Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience there while we figured that out. Today, I'll be speaking to you about repurposing video games as discussion tools. A little bit about me. My background is in social studies education. I taught for 15 years in the state of Florida before moving to the higher ed level. I'm at Mount St. Mary College now in the Hudson Valley. And I always had an affinity for marrying instructional technology with curriculum. And I found that growing up, I see some young faces in the crowd, some beautiful faces out there, but looking at the millennials and the Gen Z, and we were socialized through mediums beyond the traditional media sources that you typically see in classrooms. Television, film, books, songs to a lesser extent are often used in social studies classrooms. However, video games typically get left out. Prior to the 21st century, they were associated with sensationalism, violence, mindlessness. Since then, it's all been debunked, but they got a bad rap for a long time. And we're kind of in a tough place right now in the social studies. I don't know if we have any social studies educators out there, but according to the standardized assessment that we have known as the NAEP, National Assessment for Educational Progress, the most recent data is pretty paltry, and it's been stagnating for decades. Students at 8th grade only pass at 15, 25, 24% proficiency levels in history, geography, and civics, respectively. So that's definitely something that needs improvement. And so my rationale is we have this socializing mechanism that students are spending a significant amount of time on. Pew conducted research back in 2018, found that 90% of US teenagers are regular consumers of video games. 50% of them played a game in the last 24 hours. So it's my belief that we should be harnessing this enthusiasm. And a lot of these games, I'm honing in on a specific genre known as COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software. And although they're marketed for entertainment purposes, they actually possess some really powerful abilities to transmit skills and information. And so these are all kind of the themes that are evoked by the governing body within the social studies, which is the National Council for the Social Studies. And they put out this C3 framework that says, this is what students should be prepared for in terms of civic and college life and whatever's beyond the classroom. So why can't we use these tools more effectively when it's sort of their go-to leisure activity? James Paul G put out a lot of great research over the years. 2005, it's a little dated at this point, but what he called the principles of good gaming. And I'll just focus in on a few. A game should be pleasantly frustrating, meaning that it should challenge you to the point where you want to keep playing. But it should be an enjoyable process throughout. And that, I think, sums up what drives me as an educator. We want to challenge students. We want to hold them to rigorous standards, but we want it to be an enjoyable journey to get to that point. The theory that I harness, one of the theories that I harnessed for this study as constructivism, we have our four forefathers, I guess we'll say, of constructivism here. Kant, Dewey, Piaget, and Brunner. And so that definitely grounded in ideas of social constructivism. I'm sure we're all aware, where students shape their own reality based on their experiences and interpretation of events. And the second guiding theory here for the study is CHAT, which stands for Cultural Historical Activity Theory. This grew out of Vygotsky's work. And essentially in CHAT, the learning is centered around a particular medium. In this case, it would be the video game that's driving the thought process. But you also have social structures in place, informal structures, the students' relationships with one another, more formal, like the school culture itself. And through that process, we can engage students in the work of experiencing, this curricular content that is oftentimes absent or just not being comprehended on a meaningful level. In terms of a definition for video games, Barab and others put out a good one back in 2009, that they're powerful tools that allow students to investigate issues, to make them reporters, scientists, historians, where they're resolving dilemmas. And again, this is really the antithesis, or the driving force rather, for this study. There's been a lot of research done in the past in social studies using simulations, particularly paper-based simulations. These have been around for years. I'm sure many of you recall them from your classroom days. Unfortunately, most of them have been atheoretical. They haven't really been attached to the broader learning goals within the social studies. So we lost out on a lot of really rich qualitative data in terms of the student discussion, collaboration that takes place while these students are playing games. There are three primary genres of social studies video games. I'm going to be honing in on simulations. So these are the semi-historical games. They're not necessarily bound to any specific time or place, but they do draw on historical concepts. The second genre is counterfactuals. This is like the civilization theory series, if anyone's familiar with that. So it plops you into a historical setting, and then you make choices that will impact and or change history in some way. And the final genre is what we call documentary adventure, or RPG games. So these games are based on real events. You take the role of real historical actors, and based on your choices, the story evolves from there. Waiting on something. There it is. Students, within this virtual setting, they become heroes. They're making these executive decisions, which are grounded in the background knowledge that we provide them as educators. And what I love about a video game is that it allows you to take risks. And all too often, students are afraid, they're very anxious these days. And I think video games can be a great tool to show them that failure is a means towards improvement, that we can only get better through failure, and we shouldn't be afraid of taking chances. We exist in this culture of simulation now, and I think we should embrace it. The educational research community still has a pretty rudimentary understanding about how this type of learning through simulation can enhance students' ability to process the past. So getting into my particular study here, I'll let you read my research questions. The third one is what is a little more unique to this particular study. There has been, of course, many game-based learning studies in the past, but I wanted to harmonize the ability for students to discuss these items traditionally, face-to-face, but also digitally, and using that gameplay as the socializing medium, very much in a way that a book or a movie would be used as a secondary source in the social studies classroom. Video games are now at a point where, particularly with these COTS open world style games, designers spend painstaking hours. I mean, we're talking thousands of human hours invested into getting these environments right. And so in a sense, they're as, if not more valuable than a movie, that is, of course, including directors and writers' biases. So the methodology, it was a phenomenological case study. I honed in on high school students, and this is teacher-led gameplay. I probably should have mentioned that previously, whereas, I'm in control of the controller. I'm guiding the students through this journey, and they are taking part in discussion around the choices made within the game. My results were interpreted through a discourse analysis. And of course, when we're looking at case studies, we're all about the particularization. So this is by no means meant to be generalized to a larger group. Over the course of the next year or so, I plan on repeating this study with a larger group of participants. So we'll see if it plays out for more of the general population. Took place over 9 weeks. The participants were harnessed from a after-school club. This was in the state of Florida, Tampa Bay area. The club was known as the Video Game Club, very generic name. And the students would typically play a culturally significant game. I would ask some questions after the gameplay, was over, and this is where I drew my pupil pool from. There were about 30 members within the video game club, and from that I was able to pull out 14 research participants who were fully dedicated, at least based on their consent forms. Things happen, of course, as always in every study, but in the initial stages they were dedicated, so they said. The games were chosen according to a metric that was put out by Rice back in 2007. It's called the Video Game Higher Order Thinking Evaluation Rubric. He's got another one called the Video Game Cognitive Viability Scale. And so all the games scored very high on these metrics, and that was the reason why they were selected as compared to others that are out there. I put together roughly 90-minute interdisciplinary lessons. They drew on cross-cultural themes, looked at technology, looked at society, looked at environment, all things that are measured by the NAEP. All the sessions were documented by way of my GoPro. I also had a digital voice recorder going. It resulted in 50 plus hours of transcription that I thank my lovely wife for helping me with. God bless her. The first, middle, and last week of the study also contained a small group interview in which I asked students various questions. These are just a sampling of some. So, how do you socialize while gaming? How have you seen social studies present in video games? Does this approach to discussing social studies seem beneficial to you? And so the answers evolved over the course of the 3 interview sessions. So within each 90-minute lesson, the students would engage in large and small group activities. They were all tied to higher order thinking tasks. And as I said, I was in control of the virtual setting. So for example, in the image that we see here, I'm at Concord Bridge in Massachusetts. This is in the game Fallout 4. And we were discussing scarcity of resources, nuclear proliferation, things that could play out in a hypothetical post-apocalyptic scenario, and how that looks, compared to the current state of Concord, Massachusetts. And so all of this was paired with primary and secondary sources. And as I mentioned, I was taking the students on the tour of these virtual settings and in control of the avatar. So here's how it played out. I mentioned Fallout 4 was used for a pilot study. I then went into Assassin's Creed Origins, where we talked about architecture, symbolism, religion. We then moved to Odyssey next week, where we got into mythology, diplomacies, rivalries between city-states. Week 3 was set during the American War for Independence. We talked about the idea of establishing a new world order from the perspective of the other. So looking at women during this period, African Americans, Native Americans, people who were, historically left out of the discussion. Week 4, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. We got into more economic themes, caste systems, wealth inequality, things of that nature. We then moved to a different franchise, Red Dead Redemption 2. This is set in the late 19th century American West. We talked about HEI, human environment interaction, as well as the technological conquest of nature. Week 6 was set during World War I. I used Battlefield 1 for that, of course, and we got into themes around the futility of war and the birth of the modern era. War breeds advancement, for better or for worse. Week 7 was Battlefield 5, which is a confusing title because it's a World War II game. And these themes were all around propaganda and us versus them mentality. And then I finished the study with Grand Theft Auto 5, which is set in contemporary California. And we got into concepts around ecological diversity and how humans can coincide with nature. So kind of the bookend of the Red Dead Redemption week. How are we doing on time, Paula? 2 minutes. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to skip my video demonstration. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to share that with you. I had some gameplay footage I was going to show you, but just in the interest of moving things along, because I want to give Timothy a chance as well. The discussions, I hosted them through Nearpod. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this platform. It's a way to host interactive lessons. I also pulled from Poll Everywhere for survey type questions. I looked at textual trends. used the qualitative software Deduce to try to pull out different domains and themes based on the conversations that took place. I had so much qualitative data to choose from. It was, I mean, I could milk this for many years to come. As I mentioned, there was a pilot study done, and this, kind of honed in the sample size as well as the different techniques to capture the student responses. All the students were outfitted with a laptop that had Wi-Fi access, so they were all able to take part digitally, textually if they chose to, and of course follow along with the Nearpod. And then this was a voluntary activity. This did not inform my classroom practice at all. It was all extracurricular. The data was triangulated. There were questionnaires that took place before the study began. During the study, the students had access to a Slack chat platform, which kind of served as a back channel for communication. I also took field notes during the course of the 9 weeks. And to further add reliability, I had a second coder who had a background in instructional technology as well, looked over my findings. So I had 85 documents to delve into, as I mentioned, interviews, collaborative activities, discussions. So I definitely reached saturation point. The codes that I found sticking out the most: multiple perspectives, vivid virtual imagery, and expressing empathy. And a lot of this is absent from the secondary classroom today. There was definitely some correlation between multiple perspectives pairing with expressing empathy. The fact that if students are able to engage through different mediums, whether it be a video game, a primary source, the combination of both, we can really impart more inclusive curricula. That's really the goal here as we continue to try to tell a more objective truth in the social studies. There were some limitations. Many of these students had me as a teacher, either currently or formerly. So there was a possibility that maybe they weren't as candid with me as a result of this. Whenever you're dealing with a study that's so heavily rooted in the use of technology, there's always going to be some level of unpredictability. So I ran into basically every problem that you can imagine. Poor internet connectivity, batteries not being charged, distractions of all different kinds. And then, you're always going to have some mortality as well. So in this particular study, I lost 3 participants before the study concluded. I attempted to overcome this through the use of bribery. So they had a $5 gift card to GameStop for each session that they attended. So it worked out to be $40 if they attended all 8 official sessions. So my conclusions: COTS video games offer an alternative curricular entry point, and paired with this higher order discussion can create some really meaningful moments in the classroom for students. By pairing this face-to-face with the digital discourse, students are able to develop their interpersonal skills. They develop some media literacy skills, and really those C3 civic competencies that the NCSS is trying to hone in on. We also should consider scaffolding, differentiation. Some of the students needed a little help earlier on. So I, would provide them with templates, sentence starters, conversation starters, things of that nature. And when we're structuring the lessons, we should, of course, consider Bloom's taxonomic. Am I done at this point, Paula? Basically, yeah. All right, I got 2 slides. Bear with me here, I'm sorry. Students who struggle to contribute vocally, again, this could be really effective for them. We want their input. We want to draw them into academic conversations, but due to various factors, they might not be as apt to take part. And also, as a result of this, teachers have the ability to transmit subject matter more effectively using, I have the diagram here, what we call TPAC, technological pedagogical content knowledge. So this merger of the 3 is really the sweet spot for getting this content across. And, lastly, schools of ed might consider this tactic as another tool in the instructional toolbox. I'm not saying it's going to replace more traditional uses of instruction, methods of instruction rather, but it's good to have it as an alternative. So future research, like I mentioned, I'm going to try to get a larger sample size next time around. In the state of Florida, where I conducted this research, the student cap is 25 students for core classes like social studies. So I hope to have a group around that size next time. Also, I learned that the textual burden, I used the flipped classroom model for this. So the students had to come to each session having read the primary source and kind of have some background knowledge in that. I would probably trim that down a bit because it proved to be a little burdensome for some of them. And then ideally, an instructor would work with a gameplay consultant, and that would really maximize their ability to get the most out of each game and different games. We would welcome new COTS open world titles to be repurposed for this type of social studies instruction. Thank you for hanging with me. Questions, comments? You're welcome to email me, of course.